the question, if you're not going to cut spending, you are going to have to find revenue from somewhere. And the problem is, therefore, where do you find it? You either borrow, and there's concerns about interest rates going up, or you tax more. There's very little else you can do, is there?
Well, I mean, from the Adam Smith Institute's perspective, going for growth is really the only thing that you can do. I mean, if you have more business activity, rising wages, then the government can take a lower cut of that, or at least take a lower ratio.
But can you legislate? I totally get that argument, but we hear politicians say we're going to go for growth, but ultimately that feels like a non-answer, doesn't it? Because obviously in an ideal world, everyone would make more money and there'd be more money going into the pot, but can you legislate for that growth?
Well, I think in some ways it requires you to adopt a longer-term mentality of reform rather than the sort of high tax, high spend approach being taken at the moment.
Give an example what you mean.
Well, I would say, I mean, on national insurance, for example, the Taxpayers Alliance did some interesting analysis on this using a dynamic model, finding that about 2/3 of the revenue generated from the national insurance hike would be lost over the following few years, given the lost growth and the reduced tax receipts that would come through that. I mean, I think it's perhaps not an obvious one, but the cost of childcare is quite prohibitively expensive for ordinary people, and it also keeps productivity down. It keeps people out of work. So, for example, the cost of childcare in the UK is the highest in Europe. Families have to dig deep into their pockets each month to pay for childminders and nurseries. I think in some cases, people pay as much of a third of their net household income on childcare. And so something like reducing or relaxing child-to-staff ratios, so something like that of Norway, would more than halve the cost of childcare, which would allow single-parent households to move, further out of the benefit system and into work, which would grow the economy.
That's a really practical example, and I think a lot of people will be nodding as you say. That's actually a way of legislating to change the situation that leads to growth, which leads to more money, which means you don't have to increase taxes. I see that chain of thought entirely. That's John Macdonald, there, Director of Strategy at the Adam Smith Institute.